Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today on this Thursday by Daniel Starkand, here to break down some news that I don't think any of us were really expecting to be breaking down today. But Robert Murray noting that the Dodgers have decided to designate Jason Heyward for assignment. That was coupled with a decision to activate Chris Taylor off the injured list as well. We knew Heyward was a candidate for this, Daniel. He hits the big home run the other day. It felt like the Dodgers didn't need to make a decision today, and yet here we are. Jason Heyward's time as a Dodger is, at least for now, officially over.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to see you again. We were just on the live show last night. I guess a little different tone to that show than this one, you know, coming off a big sweep over the Mariners. And today, you know, the J-Hay DFA, you know, to me at least came as a bit of a surprise, just because there's always the option of throwing him on the IL as well, which we talked about this last night. We just thought they would throw Miguel Rojas on the IL, activate Chris Taylor, considering, you know, Rojas was scratched yesterday, could use, you know, a couple weeks off just because he's been playing a lot and such. So I guess I was surprised by the DFA, but like you said, it definitely seemed like J-Hay was trending to be the odd man out here. Like, we've seen Kiermaier getting a lot of starts in center field recently, and he's been playing well. Obviously Mookie is now the full-time right fielder, which is J-Hay's main position. So not surprised that he was the odd man out, but I guess I just am surprised that they went the DFA route instead of just throwing him on the IL and figuring it out later.
If I put my tinfoil hat on for a second, is it possible that after Miguel Rojas is scratched, that the Dodgers front office got a phone call from Major League Baseball that said, don't even think about it? Like, I mean, it's not impossible, right?
No, it's definitely possible. I don't know. You know, they, like, the medical staff, like, looks at these guys. So, like, you can't just totally make up an injury. Yeah. So, you know, there has to be at least something there. And I don't know, you know, what Rojas is dealing with. For all we know, he might be back in the lineup tomorrow. But yeah, you definitely have to be careful with that stuff, because I think it was like the Mets, you know, got in trouble with that last year.
So let's talk Heyward. This was the guy that 2 weeks ago, when we were on this show saying who are the two odd people out of the ultimate postseason roster, Jason Heyward was pretty much the one guy everybody agreed on. And then he gets in pinch hit in a big spot, hits the 3-run home run. Dave Roberts says it's the best moment of the year. You see the clubhouse reaction, and it kind of felt to me like, man, the Dodgers historically have been crushed for, you know, all they care about is loyalty. They're not picking the best players. They're picking the guys they like the best. Like, all the things that we've been trained to believe about Dave Roberts and the Dodgers led you to believe, man, they're just going to trust the veteran. They're going to trust the clubhouse presence. He hits the big home run, et cetera, et cetera. Surely Jason Heyward might be back above the cut line now, or at least higher on the list than he was. And that's what makes this so surprising, is not necessarily because he deserved to keep his spot on the roster. You could look at his numbers, and outside of basically Chris Taylor, every other guy in the conversation has been better than Jason Heyward, and even Chris Taylor has been better. And by the way, Chris Taylor has a contract for next year, so it would cost them a lot more to get rid of him. But I think what makes this surprising, again, is not that Heyward didn't deserve it, Daniel. It's that everything we've been trained to believe about the Dodgers led us to think they weren't going to do this.
For sure. And look, like you said, like, the on-field production was what it was, but there's no denying that Jason Heyward was a massive piece in that clubhouse as, you know, a veteran leader and kind of holding everything together. So that to me was the surprising part. Like you said, like, that's a guy who has a lot of friends in that locker room, is, you know, a lot of friends in the front office, coaching staff, etc. So, it didn't feel like he was a guy that they were just going to kick to the curb, you know, the way they're kind of doing here. But, you know, on field purposes, it makes sense. And, you know, Chris Taylor is back now, so he could play outfield if you need. Like, they got plenty of options. So there wasn't really much playing time there for a guy like Jason Heyward. And credit to him, like, he ended it on a high note. You could say, like, the big 3-run homer is his last swing in a Dodger uniform. And you know, I appreciated what he brought to the club the last couple years. Like, I know he wasn't exactly able to replicate his success at the plate from last year, and that's why we're in this position. But really good dude, both on and off the field. So he'll be missed, even if even if this is, the quote unquote right decision.
Yeah, and even looking at his stats, obviously last year he puts up 120 weighted runs created plus in 124 games. I mean, even this year it was 91. Like we were a couple months ago comparing guys who were all felt like they were hanging out in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I don't think it's not as if Jason Heyward was utterly useless and worthless as a player, but that's the beauty of where the Dodgers are now, Daniel, is they're not choosing between the least bad options. They're actually choosing between, man, we got too many guys for too few spots, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think in the few at bats he got against left-handed pitchers, Heyward actually did well this season. So technically his WRC plus against righties was lower. Like I think it's like 81 or something.
Crazy.
And that's kind of the role he was here for, was to be a platoon bat against righties. And if you're going to be a platoon bat, like you need to be at least above average against the pitchers you're going to be facing. And that wasn't necessarily the case. And they got all these other options now. So there just wasn't a clear role for him. So as great as he was in the clubhouse, this is just kind of the way things go. Like when you're on a team like the Dodgers, where you have a ton of really good options.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Let's talk two more sort of implications of this. The first is the 40-man roster. I did a video a couple days ago that the Dodgers both had a 26-man and a 40-man roster crunch basically incoming. We knew that at least one player had to be DFA'd unless they were going to do the IL thing, which they chose not to. And so Jason Heyward is that player. The 40-man roster currently sits at 39. It seems, Daniel, that the obvious solution here is that Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who's expected back in a few weeks, would be the guy to take that 40-man roster spot. I suppose the Dodgers could fill the roster spot with a reliever or something that they just plan on holding on to for a few weeks and then throwing back if they so chose. Not exactly like their bullpen has tons of flexibility from a roster crunch perspective either. That's one option. Let me throw an absolutely psychotic, I would say non-zero, but maybe less than 2% chance of happening.
Uh-oh.
Is there any world where Dodgers top prospect Dalton Rushing, who was promoted to AAA, who has been absolutely mashing, is there any world where this extra 40-man roster spot goes to Dalton Rushing and come September 1st, he gets a bit of an audition with the big league club? Is there any chance?
I mean, look, that's definitely an interesting thought. Like you said, like I'd say it's probably not 0%, but it's also not very high. Like, he's like, if you're calling up a top prospect, you want to be able to give them a runway where like you're not going to call up Dalton Rushing to just sit on the bench every day, because then you're not really getting a look at him. So like, what's the point of that? And like I know he's been playing left field or outfield in AAA, so like they're kind of preparing for that. But at the same time, there's not really many outfield at bats to go around right now. Like you got Teoscar locked into left, Mookie locked into right, and it's not like you're going to throw Dalton Rushing in center field. And Edman and Kiermaier, like that's solid there. So they're pretty set in the outfield. But look, like I think the 40-man aspect is kind of the confusing part of all this. Like if Taylor was on like the 60-day and they needed a 40-man spot for him, then I think obviously it would make complete sense. But the fact that there's no like obvious move for that 40-man spot kind of makes me question, like, what are they, like, what's going on here? And maybe it is something like Rushing, like you're saying, because like, even though Jason Heyward isn't really a guy that you need, like he still like was there for depth. And now the fact that he's basically outside the organization, now you're losing one less position player. And they still have, a roster crunch coming, like you said. But if an injury or two happens, like now you're like, all right, who's going to be on the roster? So if you would have just thrown Heyward on the IL, you could have been able to, like, if another injury happens down the line, you could have brought him back. Whereas now you don't necessarily have that option. And even if no injuries happened and you didn't need Jason Heyward and you end up needing that 40-man spot down the line, you could have always just transferred him to the 60-day IL whenever Yamamoto's coming back or whatever. And then his season is over at that point. Yeah. But you're in the same spot you're in now with that. So the 40-man spot is kind of the Brian Windhorst meme. Like what's going on here? Yeah. I guess we'll see. Now they have a little flexibility. Like it could be a reliever, like maybe Brent Honeywell finds his way back up here. Maybe, the other guy who throws 104, whose name always escapes me. Enriquez. He could end up being in the mix. Dalton Rushing, like you mentioned, like I'll be curious to see, just because Yamamoto they said, mid-September at the
Yeah.
earliest for him. So like, I don't think they're just going to keep the 40 man at 39 for the next 25 days or whatever. So I guess I'll be curious to see, what they do with that. And hopefully they don't have any more injuries to the point where now you're wondering like who's going to be that 26th guy on the roster, just because now, Heyward in theory is no longer an option for that.
Yeah, you mentioned Honeywell. I must have missed it yesterday that he accepted his assignment to AAA. So clearing waivers, that was pretty surprising given how he had pitched. But I think it's a great point because it makes the decision come September 1st seem pretty obvious that Andy Pages takes the extra spot now. But who's next? Like if Kike or Chris Taylor or Pages or somebody like that ends up getting injured, there's not another obvious guy on the 40-man roster who's kind of your 27th position player. Now, Heyward, that would have been a tough spot for him to be in because he can't be optioned, but just something to keep in mind. It does seem like Yamamoto is the simplest, but I agree with you completely that the 3-week gap between when the spot opened and what they're going to do until Yamamoto comes back makes me question. Because even if they add Honeywell, then what, do they just do the same thing again in 3 weeks, or do they try and get creative then? It's interesting. We do have a super chat here from Cordenas. Happy with the decision. Makes me feel like the Dodgers are thinking more about logical decisions for the playoffs before clubhouse veteran presence. Nice spelling there. That's it's a great joke. The presence piece. But again, this is kind of what we mentioned at the top, Daniel, that this is the thing that the Dodgers have been criticized for in the past. They didn't do that. And so I imagine there's lots of people who agree that they're happy with this decision.
For sure. It definitely feels like a bit of a change in philosophy here. Like, this is like last year in the playoffs when they started Lance Lynn over Ryan Pepio. Like they were clearly going with the veteran presence, as this message says here. So I guess you got to be happy with the change in philosophy there. Like it's the way it should be. Like the best players should play. And if you're not producing, what you did earlier in your career, or, what your value to the dugout isn't nearly as important if you're not hitting. So, I do agree. I like that they kind of went that route. Even, it sucks for Jason Heyward, a guy, we all love, but the fact of the matter is that they just have better options right now. And especially when you're looking ahead to a postseason roster, he was on the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we got the 40-man piece. The other piece that I think is an interesting element here is Andy Pages, which is a name that I mentioned. The one sort of counter to the Phantom IL was that even if you do that and bring that person back, then Pages is stuck down at AAA. And so I was always kind of asking the question of, what do the Dodgers actually think about Pages? What's his role going to be come October? Is this a guy that they want as a pinch hit bat? I've mentioned he's one of the best hitters on the team against lefties, even despite the slump that he had been in. Obviously, he's not an answer in center field. Like, I want to make that abundantly clear. If he plays anywhere in defense, it should be right field. But this feels to me like one of the things that may have sort of pressed in on having them make this decision was the idea that, well, if they want Pages back and they want him sort of testing out that pinch hitting, hit against lefties type role come September and October, then maybe there's something there. Do you see this correlated at all to maybe some sort of clues as to how they are thinking of using Andy Pages?
Yeah, I think it's 100% correlated. Like now he's, essentially a lock to be called up on September 1st, unless there's a surprise curveball, like you said, with Dalton rushing. Like, I guess that's the only thing that could change that. But definitely feels like Pages will be up on September 1st. He went deep last night for AAA OKC. So it's actually good that he could go down there for 2 weeks, get every day at bats, because he hasn't been getting those, up with the big league club. And then hopefully when he comes back up September 1st, he's kind of, locked in a little bit. And look, I do think there's a possibility for a role for a guy like him. I know you were tweeting about this. Like, if they wanted to do a platoon and they're willing to move Mookie around the diamond, which is a big ask, and obviously Mookie has been willing to do it, but there is a natural platoon there where Mookie's in right against right-handed pitching and with Lux at second, and then against left-handed pitching, you move Mookie into second base and throw Pages in right field, because Pages has been really good against lefties this year. Gavin Lux, as great as he's been, he's struggled against lefties. So I definitely think that's something they might try out. And I tweeted about this. Like, it feels like there's basically going to have to be one roster decision when it comes down to the postseason. And, The starting nine is what it is, and then you have 4 bench spots from there. Austin Barnes is getting one of them. Feels like 2 of them are, I wouldn't say locks, but pretty close to it now is Kike, and I would add Kevin Kiermaier just because he's now kind of your only lefty bat off the bench, which means kind of that last spot is going to come down to Andy Pages and Chris Taylor. So you want to at least get a look at Pages, come September 1st to see if he's still hot and if he earns that spot, or if a guy like Taylor, given his experience, is going to have that. So, yeah, I definitely think Pages, we'll see him on September 1st. They probably have that flight booked already. And then we'll kind of see what role he has from there.
Another super chat here from Rogelio. Jeff, I told you yesterday, Kiermaier ain't going anywhere. I said it on Twitter. I was wrong. I thought he was going to be the odd man out, and I was wrong. I think to your point, I still think there's one guy is going to be the odd man out come postseason time. And I think depending on how all these guys look, Chris Taylor, Kiermaier, Pages, Kike Hernandez, I think all 4 of those guys are going to have to play their way onto that roster. Because once you get to a tightened playoff format, things change and needs change. They're very different over the course of a month and a half than they are over a course of a week and a half, when you can change your roster sort of series to series, 5 to 7 games at a time. So I'm with you. I think there's the what you tweeted out and I retweeted was there's 4 guys competing for 3 spots. Austin Barnes is a lock on the bench, and basically, one person's going to be the odd man out. You can go up to 14 hitters on September 1st. You got to go back down to 13 once the postseason starts. And so we'll see kind of how that all plays itself out. Let's get to a couple questions. If you've got questions about implications of this, we've got 2 or 3 more minutes. We'd be happy to get to some of those. I do see some people in the chat talking about Freddie Freeman. We know Freddie Freeman's relationship, Daniel, with Jason Heyward. Any concerns about, we know Freddie's a sensitive guy, and I don't say that negatively. So, I mean, we know how close he was. Obviously, he's a professional. He's an adult, but any concern about maybe how this might be received on his end?
I wouldn't say concern. It's definitely a thought I had, but I think at the end of the day, Freddie's a grown up, and as much as he loves Jason Heyward, I don't think he's gonna, throw a big stink over this. Like, Jay Hay's still getting his full contract. Like, it's not costing him any money. It's just kind of costing him the last month of the season or so. If the Dodgers win a World Series, Jason Heyward will get his ring as well. So, yeah, but yeah, obviously you have the thought of how's Freddie going to take this for sure?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just a reminder, we will be live on the Dodger Blue 1958 YouTube tonight. Scott and Blake, no game tonight. So I don't think we've got a time yet, but make sure to follow Dodger Blue 1958 on social media. And if you're subscribed here, you'll get notifications and a reminder once that's coming. Derek wants to know, does Kiermaier still have value in the playoffs if his bat goes cold in September? What do you think, Daniel?
I would say more value from a standpoint of like a defensive replacement or like a pinch runner. Like, those are roles in the playoffs that don't seem that important, but when it's a big spot and it's a tie game in the bottom of the 8th inning, and Will Smith gets on, hits a double, and you need that winning run to score, like, then you have a guy with solid speed, and obviously the defense is exceptional. But I do think a lot of his value as far as being in the lineup will be like, could he be at least passable offensively, which so far he has been, and who knows if that will continue. But I do think even if he's not hitting, there's value there, but it won't be a consistent role. I'd say, like, it would just be like, hey, come play the 9th inning in center field or go pinch run.
Yeah, I could see pinch running. That would be the greatest value to me. And again, it's just because, like, I would find it, the reasons that he tends to be starting when around Miguel Rojas right now, I don't think necessarily apply in a 5-game series in October. And so if he's not starting, I don't see them taking Edman out of the game for defensive purposes. I could be wrong. If Edman doesn't hit in September, I mean, we could be talking about Kevin Kiermaier starting in center field and Tommy Edman is a bench bat. I think that's in play as well. But I think pinch running would be the biggest, sort of selling point for Kiermaier, especially if you're saying, hey, the Dodgers kind of have 9 or 10 guys. We're not going to need a ton of pinch hitters, because who in this lineup are we taking out? Lux against lefties. But other than that, who's getting taken out of this game? And so, I guess Miguel Rojas might be the only one, and then you can move some pieces around. But so, yeah, I think running is the piece that maybe should be talked about as far as value. And we've seen the Dodgers go with add a guy on the end of their bench just for speed purposes So something to keep an eye on.
And just to add on to that real quick, I would say like there might be a scenario where like it's a close game in the 8th inning and they bring in a tough left-handed reliever against someone like Gavin Lux.
Yeah.
So you counter by pinch hitting, Kike or something. And then you put Kiermaier in center field for the 9th and move Edman into second base or something like that. Like I definitely think it would just be a way less significant role.
Yeah. Last question here from Cordenas. Does this DFA make you guys feel like they will make harder decisions down the line for players like Walker or even Taylor if they don't have value to the Dodgers? I'll just caveat this. Walker Buehler is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. Chris Taylor's under contract for next year. But I think it's a fair question. We've kind of assumed they're going to do right, yada, yada, yada. Does this change the way you view a Walker Buehler free agent decision or a Chris Taylor roster decision this offseason?
I would say more so for like the postseason roster. I'd say like it probably shows a willingness to go with the best 9 guys when it matters most in the postseason. So yeah, I mean, I think we've been seeing them make tough decisions for the past couple of weeks here, which, like, don't get me wrong, that's a good thing. That the fact that that they have to make these tough decisions, that means that you have a lot of quality players, and B, that they are actually making them and not just going with the guys who have have the biggest influence in the clubhouse or have the most years of service time or whatever. Like I think the best players should play, and that's kind of shows what we're seeing. Like I don't think like we'll see what happens with the starting rotation, but I don't think Walker Buehler is really in the mix right now, and I think he kind of understands that unless he improves significantly, like he's not expecting his name to be on the postseason roster. So yeah, I do think it shows a willingness, to make those tough decisions. Like you said with Taylor, he's under contract next year, so I wouldn't expect a Chris Taylor DFA anytime soon.
Yeah.
And once the offseason rolls around, like we could have that conversation when the time comes. But yeah, I definitely think they are willing to make those hard decisions. And I'd say this, Heyward one was probably the hardest of them all, to be honest.
Yeah, and a guy that maybe was a hint at this kind of thing is look at what happened with Justin Turner. Like when Justin Turner came up and they kind of decided, hey, we think the value has diminished and isn't a great fit here. They kind of, we don't know the full story there, but they clearly weren't aggressive in pursuing him. Let's say that. And so that tells me that with a guy like Walker Buehler, from a roster perspective next year, we could probably expect the same. Again, I don't think it means Chris Taylor ends up getting DFA'd. Obviously not now or even in the off season. But I mean, if he's terrible for the next month and a half, I wouldn't say there's no chance of it happening. Let me end with one last question. And this might seem like an absolutely insane one, so that's why I'm ending with it. Is there any chance, like in the offseason, Jason Heyward is back with the Dodgers? Like, do you think that is in play where they're looking at the roster construction now and saying, well, they're full, whatever, but they decide in the offseason that, he's available. Maybe it's a minor league deal, or maybe it's kind of minor league deal with like a hint, wink, wink guarantee to be on the roster. Like, or do you think, hey, they wouldn't do this if they had any interest in bringing him back?
When you first started asking that, I thought you meant like as like a coach or something. I would say that might be more likely. I don't know. I don't know where Jason Heyward is at right now. Like, I don't know how he's taking this decision. Like, is he mad right now? Does he feel that he should still be on this team?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then he probably wouldn't want to come back. Or does he, understand it and is appreciative that he got as many opportunities as he did?
And $9 million from the Dodgers.
And $9 million. And if that's the case, then like you said, maybe they do bring him back on a minor league deal. Obviously, we know he's got a great relationship with Freddie and other guys in the clubhouse. But I would say, when you're the Dodgers, you got better options. Like, let's just be honest here. And even going into next year, like Tommy Edman's still going to be under contract. Chris Taylor is still under contract. Pages is in theory going to be ready for a bigger role. And I guess Teoscar Hernandez is the biggest question mark. Like, is he a guy that you bring back? And if not, then a lot more outfield at bats just kind of opened up there. So we'll see. The offseason's a long time away. We'll see how the playoffs go first, like how some of these guys perform in October. It usually affects, the decision making in the offseason. But I definitely wouldn't rule it out. Like, you hope that, this ended on good terms just because Jay Hay's a great guy. Like, you don't want him, upset, even if like he doesn't agree with it. I hope he at least understands it. But we'll worry about the offseason when it gets here.
Do you think he'll get claimed by somebody? Like, could you see a playoff team out there looking at Jason Heyward, looking at the veteran presence, looking at, just kind of the platoon thing and taking a chance?
I don't think he'll get claimed just because that would mean they'd have to pay the rest of his salary. I think he'll go unclaimed. And then look, I definitely think he might get some calls in free agency just because injuries happen all the time, and you never know when someone's going to need an outfielder. And the last memory of Jay Hay was just him hitting a 3-run bomb. So maybe a team looks at that and says he's still got a little left in the tank. And look, he still has till September 1st to catch on with another team to be eligible to make a postseason roster. So maybe that played a part as well, where the Dodgers said, hey, like, we want to give you a chance to catch on somewhere else for the rest of the season. But, we'll see. I definitely think there's some teams out there. I mean, we just saw a series with the Seattle Mariners, and if they threw Jay Hay in right field, that would probably help their offense. Yeah. So there's some teams that could use him.
Okay, last thing, because I'm just thinking. I mean, is there any chance there's a wink here deal with the Dodgers where it says, hey, we're going to DFA you. Probably nobody's going to claim you on waivers because they don't want to pay you, the remainder of your salary, and then you'll be back on the roster on September 1st. Like, is that like less than 10% chance?
I would say it's very low, just because if that was the case, they probably just throw him on the IL. Yeah. Like, they're paying him the $9 million regardless. So, like, to me, if that was the scenario, they could have just thrown him on the IL, and that's
unethical, Daniel. That's why you wouldn't throw him on the IL.
Yeah, it's not lying. Yeah, we've never seen it before with the Dodgers. Totally.
It's fair. Well, hey, everybody, that'll do it for us. Again, the news: Jason Heyward DFA'd by the Dodgers. Stay tuned here again tonight. Scott and Blake will be back doing a live show breaking down this, reactions, anything that comes out in the next few hours as it relates to Chris Taylor, Jason Heyward, the Dodgers plans, anything like that. So we appreciate you hopping on with us live on a Thursday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. And as always, go Dodgers.